All right, so again, welcome back. Tonight we'll be talking about Substance Painter and the process for creating the book. Now, on FSO, again, the video here is a little bit older, but again, we will be going over the most recent version Painter, which I have open right now. They did do a little bit of rebranding. It's now called Adobe 3D Painter, I think. I think Substance is still in there. Yep, so that's good at least. So they got bought out by Adobe about 2.5, 3 years ago. And now they're slowly kind of moving that branding over. And so now you can see the icons have changed. Those are a little bit different. Not a fan personally. These dark green kind of looks like puke. Don't look very appealing, but yeah, personal complaint, right? So the videos are up here if you still need them. They should still be relevant. You should still be able to follow along just fine. Down at the bottom, we do have photographic reference. So everything we do will be based off this reference. We have two options. The Google Photo Album here. So if you want, you can actually view all of the images right here, right? Nothing wrong with that. This will totally work just fine. The only problem I have is when you kind of click on it, it takes a couple seconds for it to kind of up-res, and then it appears, right? A little bit harder to zoom in as well. You know, it's a little bit more cumbersome. So I'm not a huge fan. My personal preference is using PureRef. It's completely free, right? We've kind of talked about this a little bit in week 1. So the application download is right here. Open that up, download it for free, and take advantage of it, right? Now, if you go into the download here, it will be like, hey, would you like to chip in $10? And you're gonna be like, no, I'm a poor college student. How about you guys pay me to use your software, right? So maybe when you guys are successful in your careers, you come back, chip in a little bit, and compliment them on their nice program that a lot of people are using. So it is free if you choose to do so. Now we also have the actual file right up here. So the PureRef album download itself. And so what this is going to look like, in fact, let me just go ahead and download it right now so you can see exactly what that process is going to look like. So it's a rather large file, but that's just because it has all of the images in it. So hopefully this goes pretty quick. Shouldn't take too long on my connection. I wonder if I actually have it downloaded already. Let me check. I do not. All right. Almost there. Almost. Wait for it. So again, depending on your connection, obviously that might take a while. But once you have it, you have it. You're going to have access to all the reference you need, and you'll be looking good. All right. So let me go ahead and unzip this. And you're going to have essentially one file that contains all of the reference. Right? So if I launch this, give that a couple seconds to load, bring this into view, this is what you should see, right? So it's all the same images on the Google Photo Album, except now it's local to your drive, and you can zoom in and see 100% of the resolution of that image, and it's as fast as your computer is, right? So if you have a good fast hard drive, those should load really, really quick. Another great thing is we can keep this on top as we work, right? Which is going to be a phenomenal thing, right? So I can just kind of keep this up here and then kind of go about my business, and I'll always have access to my reference. Quick overview of moving this around. If you right click hold, you can move PureRef around. Middle mouse drag will pan, middle mouse wheel will zoom in and out. And if you want, you can left click and actually organize the images however you see fit. You can even add to the collection if you wanted to, right? It's yours to use however you see fit from this point forward. All right. Oftentimes, instead of me, so there is a mode here. If you want it always on top or always on bottom, or just turn that off so it does go behind, that's entirely up to you. Oftentimes what I'll do is I'll just leave it on always on top, and when it's in the way, I just shove it down to the bottom left or bottom right or somewhere out of view, and then I forget where it is. I'm like, where did I put it? And then we just bring it back, right? But that's PureRef, super simple, highly, highly recommend, right? Now we do have some third-party resources, but again, Painter, now that has just recently changed, these links don't actually work, not yet anyway, so you're just gonna get a 404 when you load this up. Wait, did they fix it? Nope, it's still down, right? So I'll just have to update those links and they should be good. But either way, this is what we're going to be creating tonight from start to finish. So the expectation is you guys haven't had too much time in Substance Painter. So we want to make sure we give you all the tools and knowledge necessary to accomplish the task at hand. Now I understand, it is a bit intimidating, but we're going to break it down to its most basic elements, all right? So let's go ahead and just start. How do we get a project into Painter, right? So this is ground zero. So what we need to do is actually prep our asset for Painter. It's a really simple process. One, we need UVs. Thankfully, the book is already UV'd and good to go. Two, we need to assign a material to the object. Now, normally every object already has a material assigned to it, right? And that's usually not a problem. But we need to understand how Painter separates what we call texture sets. So Painter is actually going to look at an individual item and say, what material is assigned to this? Okay, that's what my texture set is named off of. And if for each object that has a unique material, we're going to get a unique texture set. Because we're only working with just a book in this case, we don't necessarily have to worry about multiple texture sets. We'll get to that with the table and the washers, okay? So all I'm gonna do right here is I'm gonna select the top book. Doesn't really matter which one you pick, they're identical, but I'm just gonna grab the top one. I'm gonna hit Shift-T to assign a new material, and I'm gonna just apply a Lambert, okay? Any one of these materials would work. Lambert, super simple. We'll go ahead and name it. And I'm just going to call this book Geo, book base, book whatever, something you would recognize back in Painter, right? So we've named it, and now this is ready to be exported and brought into Painter. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll go up to File and Export Selection. Now I do want to keep things nice and organized, right? We're going to be using FBX as our file format. All right, so make sure that's loaded. If you don't see FBX, make sure the plugin is loaded for FBX, and then you'll have that functionality. But what I want to do here is actually go into my project set itself. So if you click on Workspace Root here, you'll navigate straight to that directory. And we're going to create a new folder. All right, so I'm going to just right-click, add new folder, and we're going to call this Painter. Now, you don't have to. This is just good practice to keep things in a nice clean location, so when you open this up later, you're not having to dig around across your desktop or in different drives or some USB somewhere. Everything is here for this class in one location. All right, within the Painter folder, I'll create a new one called Book, and anything related to the book I can save in this folder. Okay, so we'll save the FBX. We'll call this Book Geo and save it out. Let's jump into Painter. We are done with Maya, right? So the Painter interface is actually quite simple. Let me go ahead and reset my UI because it has changed a little bit, right? So when you open up Painter for the first time, it's going to look a little like this, right? A little bit of a change. So the shelf has now gone from the bottom to up here on the left side of your screen. Or is this the left? I don't know. Camera left. We have all of these windows over here, but there isn't really much we can do in Painter until we actually open up a file. Right? So if you're ever just kind of following a YouTube video and you just need something to practice on, you don't have anything prepared, Adobe's got you covered. So if you go up to File and Open Sample, you can load in any one of these files. So for instance, if I brought in Meet Matte, this is a great one. This one actually comes in with multiple texture sets, so you can kind of see that list over here. So take a note at how this kind of breaks apart the various pieces of geometry, right? But now you have something you can kind of play with and just drag and drop and kind of experiment within the Painter interface, right? But thankfully, we already have a model, so we can just open up what we have. So what we're going to do is go up to File and New. We're going to go ahead and select our template. We will be using PBR Metallic Rough. So my biggest complaint with the most recent update is Adobe has decided to create their own material standard. So when you see ASM, that's the Adobe Standard Material, just what we need. Another material in the pile of materials. Now we got V-Ray, RenderMan, Arnold, you name it. Everyone wants to have their own proprietary renderer and proprietary material. It's cumbersome. Right now, the big goal is to push to something what we call Material X, where it's just a universal shader that works on all rendering platforms. But this is not going to help, right? Breaking it up into another material. But thankfully, the PBR Metallic Rough will still convert to what we need, okay? So PBR Metallic Rough, that's the one we want, ASM. Now there is another one down here. If you scroll down, there is a PBR Metallic Rough with Alpha Blend. That would technically work fine as well, but we're going to keep it simple. We're just going to pick this one. File type, we're going to go ahead and hit select, and we're going to navigate to our directory. I've already set a shortcut here so I can quickly navigate to it. Painter, Book, Book FBX, and Open. Now the document resolution we can change at any time. Now I don't want to get too deep into a lot of these settings, but this is interchangeable at any time. We're just going to kick this up to 2K to start and just leave it at that. Now one thing I do want to ensure is that we do not check UV tile workflow. UV tile workflow is essentially when we use UDEM, basically when we go outside 0 to 1 space. Everything in this class will be using a traditional 0 to 1. We will not be working in UDEM. Keep this unchecked, all right? If you have it checked, you're kind of locked into it. You can still make it work. It's not going to make Painter a problem. It's just the connections back into Maya change a little bit, okay? I didn't bring the camera, but you could bring it in if you wanted to. Auto unwrap, I'm going to uncheck, but technically I can leave it on because it's not going to do anything. What auto unwrap does is it actually automatically UVs your object, right? Surprise. Unfortunately, it does a pretty terrible job, at least in my experience. But because the book is already UV'd, it'll just ignore it. So in this case, we'll just leave it checked and click OK. All right. And if you have questions, please, by all means, let me know. Let me get the chat up. Let's see here. I thought we had to donate, so I didn't download it. No, you can just put in 0. It's like, I don't know if you guys still use WinZip or WinRAR, the permanent free edition where it just like nags you. It's like, hey, by the way, could you finally buy our software after the 2 decades you've been using it? No, close. By the way, don't use WinRAR. 7-Zip is free, open source, and in my opinion, better. All right, so we're in Painter. Let's do a quick jaunt over the interface here. All right, so first thing I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna move the shelf. I'm so used to it being down at the bottom. I'm just gonna go ahead and click, drag, and move it down here and just snap it to the bottom, okay? You could put it wherever you want, right? And if you really screw up the interface, just go up to Windows, reset UI, good to go, all right? We have, actually, this is probably what you're gonna see when you initially open it up. You'll have, let me switch this here real quick. So you'll have the 3D view on the left, the 2D view on the right, right? Thankfully, there's no fancy controls here. Maya camera controls, you're gonna be right at home, right? So if you can navigate Maya, you can navigate Painter, right? Similar with the 2D view over here, you're just basically holding Alt and using your left mouse button or right mouse button or the middle mouse to kind of navigate, okay? On the left, we have our toolbar, right? This is gonna kind of compose a lot of the tools we'll be using throughout the month. So hitting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and all of these keys, we'll cycle through them. There's no like hitting the S key or the G key, right, in Photoshop. You just have to hit 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? It is context-based, so depending on which tool you have active, that is going to change the top toolbar as well as the properties in the bottom right, okay? And it's also context-based depending on what you have selected, whether you have a material or a layer or a mask selected. So be aware of that, right? The properties will change depending on what you have appropriately selected. As far as kind of changing the view here, we can do a single 3D view by hitting F2, a single 2D view by hitting F3, and a dual view by hitting F1. If you're on a MacBook, you can hold that function key, the FN key in the bottom left, and then you'll have access to F1, F2, F3, okay? Let's see what we got for questions here. What was the one we didn't want to check? UDEM. Yeah, we don't want to use UV tile workflow. Thanks for chipping in on that. You can also click up here on the top right. So if you click on this, you can just kind of switch between the views pretty easily. So if you're not comfortable with the hotkeys, I understand, right? So I'm going to leave it in this kind of 2D split view for now. On the bottom, we have arguably the spot you're going to spend a lot of time, the shelf. All right. So the shelf has probably got the major changes here. I believe they still call it the shelf. I'm calling it the shelf. So down here we have access to materials, grunge maps, smart materials, smart masks, generators, filters, tools, brushes, Photoshop brushes. Oh my goodness, everything, right? And so if we look at this, right, if I turn all of this on and just start scrolling through this list, it just keeps coming and coming and coming and coming. In fact, there's so many, it's like taking a while to load all of the swatches, okay? So oftentimes what we're gonna be doing is we're gonna be searching for specific tools or materials or whatever it is you're looking for. So it's a very broad. So for instance, if I'm looking for something like gold, I can just type in gold and find gold, right? Or anything with the word gold or close to it in it. Old, fold, right? So you get the idea. If I'm searching for leather, I can find everything related to leather, right? So this is bringing up brushes, this is bringing up alphas, materials, and smart materials. If I want to refine that search a little bit more, I can click on any one of these icons to filter, right? So right now, all it's pulling up is materials, smart materials, brushes, alphas, and textures. So if I wanted just the material, I can click on this icon and immediately filter it, okay? The biggest issue I have with the new shelf is when I do a new search, so for like a grunge map, what it's doing, it's still filtering by the materials, and it's like, I gotta constantly have to click on this now to reset the search, okay? So just be aware that these are like toggles, so you have to turn them on and off depending on what you're looking for, all right? That's the biggest change. There's a little drop-down menu here as well. This will be useful later when we go to our project settings, when we bring anything in or do our baked mesh maps, okay? So let me go ahead and just clear our search here. And there we go, we have everything back. On the right, we have our texture set list. So note the name, book_geo. So we named this back in Maya, and this is what it's named in here. And if I click on the little eye, that means everything related to this texture set is now being toggled visibility-wise, okay? We don't use the texture set list all too often, and there's a hotkey we can use to navigate between multiple objects. For me personally, I like to just dock this and kind of clear up some real estate, right? It's still there if you need it, but now it's not taking a constant spot on your interface. Again, it's up to you. You can modify the interface however you see fit. Please, by all means, make it comfortable. You will be using the layer stack of the property editor a lot, so make sure you give ample space for those. The layer stack works just like Photoshop layers, right? We're going to be creating a lot of layers. We're going to be dragging materials in here. We'll be creating masks. We'll be applying things like levels and filters. There's a lot you can do here, right? So we'll be spending some time in here, so you'll get a little bit comfortable with that. And then, of course, finally, our property editor. So again, depending on what I have selected, what tool I'm working with, or what material. So for instance, if I drag this aluminum insulator into my layer stack, you can see the properties have changed. Okay, so be aware of that. And if I select something else, the properties will change again. Now, as far as kind of lighting the scene, let's take a look at that. So right now, the scene is being lit with an HDR, much like the dome light back in Maya. So if you go up to your display settings on the top right, and we bring this out, so there's some additional docked windows, by the way. So in fact, if you close out a window, it never really disappears. It's just docked, right? So if I want to bring that back and redock it, I can absolutely do that, okay? So here's our display settings. And so let me turn up the opacity here. So here is that dome light that we're lighting the scene with. So right now it's a bit blurry. That's fine. That's just the default functionality. But really, this is what it looks like, right? So if you're curious what's lighting your scene, that's what it is. Now you can drag this rotational slider if you like. I would prefer if you did not. Hold Shift, right click, and drag to rotate the light. Write that one down. That is a useful tool. You're going to be doing it a lot. It's going to help you diagnose a lot of issues because you'll see like your reflections change when you move the light around. That's going to help you kind of see what your roughness maps look like. Okay. Now, I don't necessarily need to see the environment, so usually I'll keep the environment opacity at 0, but I would recommend we do change the environment map, and here's why. Right now we're lighting in kind of a neutral environment, right? It's a sunny day, it's got a lot of greens in it. It's not too bad, but some of these are a little extreme, like this cave entrance here. If I load in the cave, you can see I have a lot of green tones in the map, right? Or at least the image. And so what's going to happen is you're going to start texturing and try to counteract that, right? Subconsciously, it's kind of affecting you. You're making color choices based off what you perceptually see on the screen. Same if I were to load in, say, like this studio. It looks cool, don't get me wrong. I love the retro colors, but now I'm making decisions based off what I see. What I would suggest is picking a neutral environment. Studio Tomiko is actually a pretty good one for that. Again, you could use whatever you want. There's no wrong answer here. I would just encourage something that isn't too colorful and that gives you a good idea of what your reflections are going to look like. So this kind of fits the bill. All right. I'm going to go ahead and kill the opacity and just leave that alone. It does support shadows, but they tend to be slow and they usually don't look all that great. You can see them right there, right? So I'm just going to keep that off. We don't necessarily need it, but it is there if you want it. Now there's some other cool settings as far as adjusting your camera, post-process, if you want to get real fancy in here, start putting little, J.J. Abrams up in here. Oh yeah. When in doubt, bling it out, right? Get that lens flare. No, don't do that, right? But it's an option, right? So you can actually do little renders in the viewer and show off your work and upload it straight to ArtStation without having to take it back into Maya. So that is a feature. But basically all of this, we're just going to leave it default. I would encourage you, just go through it, right? There's nothing in there that shouldn't be too hard to understand just by turning it on or off. Jumping over to our shader settings. So this is where we can change our settings as far as the tools or like things like subsurface or tessellation, right? Usually the only thing you're going to kind of come in here are for those two features. So there's our subsurface. We can enable it or disable it. But the one I really want to take your attention to is displacement mapping. So by default, with no tessellation enabled, if you look at the silhouette of the model, you can see it's flat, right? It looks like it's got surface detail based off the normal maps we've applied based off this aluminum insulator, but it's not changing the silhouette in any way, okay? And that's fine. It's fast, it's responsive, it looks good. But if I actually want to alter the model through displacement mapping, what I can do is enable tessellation. So as I start to increase the scale, I can make it bulge out based off the height map, right? And so we could actually do this effect back in Maya, and it's called displacement mapping. Right now, it's just using tessellation to control the subdivision count and the height map to drive the intensity, right, based off the scale. Now I can control the quality by the tessellation, so the more triangles I throw at it, the better it's going to look. Obviously, the more triangles, the slower your performance. So this is a performance hit. That being said, because of that, we're going to keep that disabled. But please realize that this is a functioning feature. You can take advantage of this, and you can do some really cool things with this, right? Not without problems, right? You can see it kind of breaking at the seams. So really what I would have to do is make that a bit more subtle or do a better job with my UVs, okay? Again, we will not be using this, so we're going to just keep that disabled. Just know it's a thing. Finally, we have the history, so I can kind of go backwards in time. I just do undo. I rarely use the history. And then finally, the log. So if something goes horrifically wrong, you'll get an error, and we'll still be, lost at what happened. You'll have to Google search something or, kind of troubleshoot. But, it's there. Cool. That's the basic interface breakdown. So fortunately, it's not that complex. I know that sounds silly, right? Like there's still some complexities here, but it's not like Photoshop or Maya in the sense that it's had a long time to mature and become a little bit bloated. It hasn't reached that point yet. It's still in its infancy. I know it's been around for a couple of years, but it's still relatively young in the grand scheme of 3D applications. So given time, I'm sure this is going to become like the next ZBrush where it's like, what am I even looking at? There are so many menus and drop downs and scrolls. It's like, oh, I hate the ZBrush so much. Shift right click drag, yes, for the lights. That is correct. Can you upload the HDR from the project file? Yes, you can. That's actually a very good tactic. But again, since that has a lot of warm lighting in there, that might change your view on how you're texturing this. So yes, you can absolutely load that in. And I have seen students do that. I would encourage you, don't even bother. Not even worth it, okay? Okay. That's your breakdown of the interface. So let's get this started here, right? What is step one when it comes to texturing in Painter? Well, it's kind of up to you, really. There's many ways we can tackle this. So I'm going to show you several different ways over multiple objects. So today we're going to kind of teach you how to do everything just within Painter, right? We're going to use the pre-built asset library of all the materials that are already included, and we're going to manage to change that and make it look just like what you see here. All right, which is great. You won't always be able to do that though. You might have to find outside resources or other materials that other artists have created, or you can create your own using different tools. But for today, we're going to keep it simple. Everything will be included in its entirety here within the application. So we're going to try to build it up in layers, right? like it's actually constructed. So if we look at the actual book, you can see it's kind of composed of fabric, a little bit of gold trim, the leather itself, and of course the pages, right? So how do we handle all of that? So we're going to break it down, right? We're going to start with leather. We're just going to be like, okay, if this is leather, and then we can put the fabric on top, and then maybe the gold on top of that. So let's do that. So let's search for leather and see what comes up. Now, you'll be presented with a couple options. And what I want to do is use materials over smart materials. So you've probably heard smart materials. Let me show you what those are. This is a smart material. When you look at it, it's got this kind of fancy, what we call shader ball with the material applied to it. Now, there's nothing wrong with smart materials. The only downside is that they're a little bit more complex when you're starting out, right? Making changes to something like this is a little bit harder because now this material is comprised of multiple layers, okay? That can be a bit overwhelming for your first time. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna stick to just materials only, which in this case looks like these guys, right? In fact, if I just click on this little icon, I'll filter by just material. So now if I drag one of these, you can see instead of expanding this out, all the attributes I can adjust are in one location, the property editor, right? As opposed to a different layer with a different subset of options, it just becomes a bit overwhelming, right? But as you progress, by all means, take advantage of those smart materials. They're wonderful, right? They're just a little bit more complex early on. So what I want to do is I want to find a leather that looks and feels like what we see here. Now, again, this would just become trial and error. Drag a material on there. Does it look good? Great. Run with it. In this case, I'm going to use the leather medium grain. I like this one because it comes in with a really nice normal map. It looks really good, right? The downside is, well, the color doesn't look that great. But with all things in Painter, we can make changes. We're never locked in at any point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my color, grab the eyedropper, and I'm just going to go ahead and color pick from the reference. Now I want to be careful. I don't want to pick a highlight, right? If I pick a highlight, clearly that's going to look a little strange. So find a color that feels appropriate to you, right? And if you kind of ballpark it, you can always go into the hue and saturation slider and make changes here. So if I want to kind of make that a little bit more saturated, maybe shift the hue a little bit more into the browns. There we go. It is a little bit more red, but you know what? I'm kind of liking that. And we have leather, okay? Now, we run into our very first problem. The leather is applied to the entire thing. Now, what did we do here? I took this leather medium grain and I dragged it to the surface. So we need to understand what Painter is doing. Painter is actually applying this as what we call a fill layer. It's like a paint bucket in Photoshop, right? It's just flooding the whole surface. So effectively what it's doing is taking this material, applying it in UV space, and then projecting that back to the 3D model, right? And we get this result. Now the problem is, because it is flooding the entire thing, it's appearing everywhere. And we don't necessarily want it to do that. So what we want to do is actually use something called a mask, all right? So this is going to be super important. I want you guys to write this down. So we have white and black masks, all right? White can equal a value of 1, can equal a Boolean statement of true, and also in a mask means it's visible. Black, on the other hand, would be a value of 0 for a Boolean statement false, and for visibility hidden. Okay, so write this down. This is going to be super important to understand because everything we do from here on out is going to rely on this idea. Okay, so what do I mean? What is a mask? Let's apply one and see what happens. So up here on the layer stack, we have some options. If I click on any one of these, I can add a mask, I can add a layer, I can add a paint layer, a fill layer, a smart material, right? Just try clicking on them and see what they kind of do. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to just click on my layer, and I'm going to click on this icon right here that says Add Mask. And we are presented with a couple options. We can do a white mask, a black mask, a bitmap, which is just an image, or some type of color selection or height blend. In this case, I'm going to start with a black mask. And this is, again, up to you how you want to start. So when I go with a black mask, I've effectively hidden this layer, right? It is completely gone. It's still there. And if I hold shift and click on the mask, I can temporarily disable or enable the mask. So this will be very useful for troubleshooting. But effectively what I've done is hidden it. And now if I select the mask, I can actually start to paint in white to reveal it. Or if I want to paint in black, I can hide it, right? So if white and black reveal and hide, what would gray do? So here's white, right? And I change the color to gray, let's say like a 50% gray. What would that do for me? I'll bring this back out. If I paint in gray on a mask, like this, what is that going to do? Think about it, because this is important. We're going to be doing this a lot. 50% of the mask, would it give you half? In between, fade? Yes, to all above. So now we're blending, all right? So where it's white, we see 100% of the layer. Where it's gray, we're seeing whatever percentage of the gray value it is, blending with the layer and whatever is beneath it, which in this case is just the default gray. So yes, you guys are all correct, right? And this is going to be super important because as I start to change the color, I'm going to get a completely different result, right? In this case, I just want to paint in white. I just want to demonstrate that, right? So the idea here is I want to kind of paint the entire top here 100% white. I want to get the bottom, and I really don't want to paint the pages. And so now this has already become cumbersome, right? Because now I'm like, oh, I got to paint this whole thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a different way to apply color. So right now we've been using the paintbrush. So let me go ahead and clear this out. I'm just going to go ahead and create a new black mask. I'm going to go over here to my toolbar, and I'm going to hit 4 on my keyboard to select my polygon fill. And what's great about this is now I can actually just select polygons to assign a color. So right now I'm assigning white to whatever polygons I've marqueed. So that's useful, right? I can select the polygons, but again, I still want to, you know, it's getting a little crazy here. That's going to be tough, right? So I don't want to do that. So instead, I'm going to use UV chunk. This is wonderful because why? If you think about it, look at my UVs. See how the pages have already been separated from everything? So if I just go over here and marquee the 2 shells I want to apply, I can do that immediately. I can also do it in the 3D view. So if I just kind of marquee right here, I'm being very careful not to select, because if I select over here, I'm assigning white, right? But if I just marquee the cover, we're good. It's applied. Just like that. So now if we look at the mask, one way we can do that is if you hold Option or Alt and left click on the mask, I can see in preview the mask data. So where it's white, we see the layer. Where it's black, it's hidden. We see the layer beneath it, which in this case is nothing, right? It's just that gray. So it's working. Let's continue on. So now I want to kind of create this effect. You see how it's kind of a little bit of a worn leather on the edges? This is where Painter really accelerates because it has a lot of tools to generate some really organic, unique looking masks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this leather rough and I'm going to drag and drop it on top of the book. So it's going to create a new fill layer. Yes, Amber, masking in ZBrush is the same as the masking in Maya. It's the same as the masking in Photoshop. It's all the same, 100%. So if you learn masking here, you understand it in any application. It's the same idea. So if we look at this, we run into the same problem. I've applied this leather rough, but it covers the whole thing. You're like, oh, I got to do this again for every single layer? No. We want to be smart about this. We want to be tactful, all right? So instead of me creating this exact same mask again on another layer, we're going to group this, and then we're going to mask the group. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and either you can click on the folder icon, which creates a group, and then I can take the 2 layers and just drag it in there. That'll work. Or you can just grab both layers by holding Shift, hit Control or Command G, and group them that way. So nothing's going to change inherently, right? It's just now these are organized into one folder. Let's go ahead and name this. We'll call this Leather Group. In fact, let's give it a color. I'll just right click on this, assign a color. Okay. So what I want to do is move this mask to up here. So we have a couple ways we can do that. You can right click on the mask, you can copy the mask, right? And then you can go up and then paste into mask, and that would work. And notice what it did, right? Notice how the leather ruff, despite having no mask on it, is now no longer appearing in this area. It's still there, right? But the mask is now hiding it. Okay. Another way we can do this is you could simply create it again. That would totally work. But I just like to copy and paste, right? Save me some effort. Now, if you think critically about this, I technically no longer need the mask down here, right? Because the group is overriding the contents of the group, right? The mask. So think of the group as the parent, and anything within that group is the child of that parent. And so when the parent's like, no, you can't be seen here, the child has no choice but to oblige, okay? These are not rambunctious children. They will listen. So what we're going to do is we're just going to remove this mask. So just right click on this, find remove mask, and it's clear. Nothing has changed, right? It's still visible right where we want it. So here's the key now. I want to blend the leather ruff with the leather medium grain, okay? So what I want to use is something a little bit different. So we've already used the polygon fill to apply a mask. I'm going to go ahead and create a new mask. And I mean, we could paint that in, right, if you wanted to get real specific, but that would take forever to get this nice organic detail. I don't want to hand paint anything. So I'm going to teach you guys about generators. These are both extremely powerful and extremely overused, okay? So tread carefully. These are not the one-click solutions you might think they are. You can easily go on the ArtStation right now and be like, metal edgeware, dirt generator, metal edgeware, right? The goal is not to make it look like a preset, right? The goal is to make it look like what you're trying to make. So with everything, with great power comes great responsibility. Sorry, had to. Anyways, I'm going to right-click on this. I'm going to add a generator. And so what this is going to do, it's going to drive the mask with the generator. Okay, now there's nothing connected to it yet. So we're going to go ahead and click on this little button here. And here are all the options you have access to. We have things like dirt, dripping rust, fiberglass, metal edgeware. You can even create your own custom, right? The functionality is there. But we're just going to keep it simple. Metal edgeware. Now, it goes completely white. All right, this is a common problem. So if we scroll down the metal edgeware, so I have it selected, take a look at the image inputs here. See how they have giant red X's on them, right? This means that the data it needs to do its job is not there. So I kind of glanced over one of the most important things we need to do every time we start a Painter project, and that is going to be baking our mesh maps every time. So let's go to our texture set settings here, and let's go scroll down and click on baked mesh maps. I believe you could do that under edit as well. Control Shift B, or probably Command Shift B if you're on a Mac. We want to do this every single time we start a project, okay? We'll talk about this in more detail later. For now, all I'm going to do is I'm going to boost the resolution to 2K, and we can just uncheck the normal and the ID. You can leave them on. It's really not going to affect anything, but these are not going to be created anyway. Let's go ahead and bake our selected textures. All right. Now what's going to happen are these maps are going to be replaced with that new data, and immediately we get a result from that metal edgeware. Take a look at that. Let's go back to my layer stack and let's look at what it created. So I'm holding Option and left clicking on that mask. So again, remember, what is a mask? White means that layer is visible. Black means we see the layer beneath it. So where it's white, I see the leather rough, and where it's black, I see the leather medium grain. Let's make some modifications to this. Again, like before, I want you guys to be cautious about your generators. Don't over-rely on them without making changes. Some good controls here. Curvature weight. We'll take the emphasis away from the curvature map. So as I bring this down, I can isolate my details a little bit better. Wear level is a useful one. Wear contrast, right? So now I can start getting some details back in the edge here, as opposed before where it's completely worn, right? Grunge mount, grunge scale are useful as well as edge smoothness. I would suggest just kind of playing with them. There is no magic number here. Have some fun with it, right? If I hit M to go back to my material view, I did not mention that. I apologize earlier. So when you're previewing your mask, M for material will go back. In fact, if you're ever curious, you can actually click on this little icon up here and cycle through any of the maps that we've created. So like base color, roughness, height, or you can cycle through your baked mesh maps, right? Just by clicking on them here, okay? M will go back to your material view. So take a look at what we've created. Now, if you look closely on this particular area, it's got a little bit of a notch. So the metal edgeware is not really going to create that for us, right? That's not what it's designed for. So we're gonna have to get a little bit more specific with our detail, right? Again, let the artistry flow. So what I wanna do is add to it. I wanna paint, but notice I can't paint on it, right? Technically I am, right? There's the paint stroke, but the generator is overriding that content. So what I need to do is create a paint layer just above the metal edgeware. So I'm going to go ahead and right click and add a paint layer. And now I can actually paint whatever I want. So again, white reveals, black hides. So I can select a grayscale value here. X will toggle it left and right on the slider here. What I might also encourage by default, I believe you're going to get the brush outline, so you won't really see the color you're painting with. Go up to here in the top left and use full preview. That's my personal preference. It's up to you, really. I can toggle the visibility of the paint layer. So if I'm not happy with it, I can just always delete it, right? Not a big deal. So let me go ahead and add that paint layer back in there. And I want to paint this in. Now this brush is not very exciting. So let's see if we can find a better brush. So I'm going to just clear my search, click on my little brush icon, and we're going to go with the Artistic Heavy Sponge here. I like this one. I use this one a lot. It does support Photoshop brushes. There are a lot of them here, some better than others depending on what you're trying to do. But I'll just double click on this and it's going to load it into my brush. Now, I'm not going to talk about the hotkeys just yet. Just know if you right click anywhere, just like in Photoshop, you can get access to all your brush settings. We'll come back to this. For now, I'm just going to kind of paint this in and kind of replicate something that looks somewhat close to that, right? So we'll get that nice little arch there, just like that. Beautiful. Again, I'm not going to worry about pixel perfect. Be loose, get creative, you'll be okay, right? If it looks somewhat similar to the reference from here, you're doing great, okay? So that's our leather ruff. Cool. Now let's move on to the next. Let's do the fabric, right? So you can see the fabric's actually being applied to both sides of the boat, both top and bottom, but it's definitely a lot more specific with the way it's being applied. So let's go ahead and collapse the leather group, and let's grab our fabric. So if I search for fabric, again, because I have my brush selected, I'm going to just deselect that and get all things related to fabric. We'll filter based off material, and let's just see what we have here. There's a couple more choices here to work with. You have things like knitted sweater. That looks terrible, right? Denim, probably not. The one I'm going to use here is fabric baseball hat. I'm going to drag and drop this right onto my model, and now I've created a new layer. Now I'm going to keep this organized again, but for now, I want to show you a problem, right? We will group this here in a second. Notice the leather is bleeding through the fabric, right? And as I toggle the visibility of my leather group, you can see that come and go. So this is what the fabric looks like without the leather. That looks a little bit better. So how do we fix this? Why is this a problem? So this entire time in my layer stack, I've been looking at the base color and the various blend modes associated with that. So what that means is that the leather and the fabric are set to normal respectively, right? They're not blending. That's what normal means, just kind of sit on top of one another. But if I change to my height, notice that the blend mode has changed to LDGE, which in this case stands for linear dodge add. So what does that mean? In the grand scheme of things, height is just a grayscale map. So we're taking height from this underlying layer, and then we're adding it to the fabric. In this case, we don't want to do that, okay? I just want to set this to normal. And now it no longer blends the height. It just sits on top, okay? Let's go ahead and make some simple adjustments here. Actually, let's just go ahead and group it, okay? Because that's going to release, or not release, but it's going to showcase another problem. So when I group it, notice that we fixed the height issue, by the way. When I group it, the height issue came back. This is going to be a recurring theme. I promise you this is going to crop up a lot. The height is by default always set to linear dodge. When I group something, the group is collecting the height data and then it added it back in. Think of it, it's kind of like almost like an override. So it doesn't even matter the fact that this is set to normal down here. Now that it's being added back into the group, it still added it back in. So I have to set the group to normal to now fix this issue. All right, so let's go ahead and name this fabric group. We'll give it a color. Let's do green. Feels appropriate. And we'll switch back to our base color so we can see our thumbnails a little bit better. All right, color. Let's get the color. So again, select the fabric baseball hat, grab your eyedropper tool, grab a nice green color there. I'm going to go with a nice dark green. Looking pretty good. But I feel like the scale, the pattern scale of these like lines coming through are much too large. So I want to tile them a little bit more to get those a little bit more in line with the reference. So I'm going to take the UV transformation here and just repeat it. We're just going to tile it a little bit more. We're going to set this from 1 to 3. So now I'm just tiling it 3 by 3, both horizontally and vertically in UV space. So if you look at the square here, you can see about 3 squares worth kind of fitting in there. So that's kind of what it's doing. So now the texture looks a little bit better. Any questions so far? How are we doing, by the way? Too fast, too slow, go faster? No one ever says go faster. You're like, whoa, slow down, buddy. Not faster. I need to practice that, the auction sales strategy. You imagine talking like an auction? That'd be a nightmare. Speed run, yes. Can we get this entire lecture under 3 minutes? All the glitches and shortcuts. I love it. Okay, good. So same idea, right? We've got our basic layout, right? We've got the fabric on there, but now again, we have to think about how we want to make sure it's only being visible where we want it. Because right now it's covering the whole book, right? So we're gonna paint this one in. So I'm gonna go ahead and right click on the group. This is gonna allow me to do some nice blending of the materials within the group. So I'll create a mask on the group. All right. I'm going to swap out the brush because right now this brush is not going to be very conducive to creating a nice clean line. So that's not going to be helpful. So let's just search for basic hard brush and we'll filter base off brushes. I'm going to load this in. Basic hard. You can use the pressure. I would recommend just a basic hard without pin pressure. It can cause some issues. I believe pin pressure is on by default. Just turn that off. The reason being is if you're using a tablet, what it's going to do, the line is going to start wide and then it's going to go small, which could be a bit frustrating, right? You can use tablet pressure if you want, but for this instance, I just want a nice clean line, okay? Let's talk hotkeys, okay? Because we want to paint this in, but I'm going to have to kind of size this up a little bit. I'm going to have to kind of change it up a little bit. So it's really, really simple. So I'm going to move my camera here. If you hold Control, you will see all of the hotkeys over here on the left, or Command, right? You can see Control left click, Control right click, and go in either left or right or vertical will change the various tool. So with my paintbrush active, Control right click, drag left and right. So I'm physically holding right click and going left and right while holding Control can change the size of my brush. Control right click up and down will change the hardness, the feathering, right? You can see that over here too. Control left click, left and right will change the opacity or the flow, flow. And Control left click up and down will rotate, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense with just a perfect circular brush anyway, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the hardness of my brush, crank it up to 1. So I'm just holding Control right click going straight up, and then I can just scale my brush to a reasonable level. And now I can start painting my mask. Now, I don't know about you, I'm pretty lazy. I don't want to have to paint things over and over. I need to paint both sides of my book. So I'm going to enable symmetry. So click on this little icon to enable symmetry. Now, obviously the axis is a little off here, so we're going to go ahead and change some settings here. Click on the symmetry options, change it to Y, and we're set up. Now again, it might be a little bit more difficult to paint in the 3D view. I'm going to jump into my 2D view. So I'm just hitting F3, or again, you can go up here and swap. Now I kind of want to match my result here. Now if I start painting, watch what happens when I paint on the edge of the book. Did you see it? Huh. It is automatically painting across texture seams for me, which under normal circumstances would be amazing, but in this circumstance, a no-go, right? Because like, ah, crap, I don't want it there. I got to paint this out, and then you start painting, and then it starts painting back over, and it's like, oh no, this is going to be a nightmare, right? Or if I paint in black, you see how it's like removing over here. So there's a few settings on the brush that we can change. If I right-click, or if you go into the properties, I'm going to scroll down, I'm going to look for alignment. Right now it's set to wrap, which just means wrap across the surface or across UV seams. I'm going to change that to UV. So now when I paint, do you see how it no longer paints across the seam? Right? So now it's isolated to my UV shell. Great, that's good, right? If I bring my cursor over here, do you see the size spazzing out, which can be a bit frustrating? So what's happening is having a little bit of difficulty in that area. The size space is set to object. So what does that mean? If I click and paint, and then I zoom out and click again, the brush stays the same size of the object. Okay, no problem. If I change it to, say, viewport, if I click and then zoom in and click, it's locked to the viewer, not the object, the camera, right? In this case, I want it to lock it to UV space, right? So I'm going to go down from viewport to texture. This will just kind of hard code it so it doesn't spaz out. See how it's stagnant now? So now I can finally paint, right? So I have symmetry turned on. I've adjusted my brush to UV alignment and texture size space, and now I'm just going to go ahead and click, hold shift to get a straight line, and click again. Now I kind of painted inward, right? That's going to give me some depth here, right? So you can see the space here. So maybe I got to paint a little bit further in. That feels pretty good right there. So let's go ahead and match that to right about there. I'll go ahead and get these 45-degree angles. So I'm going to click, hold shift, get about a 45-degree, click and hold again. Now you can see on the right, my book is a little bit darker. That's the lighting. So if that's a little bit hard to see, what you can do is switch to your base color and just visualize it a little bit differently, right? Now, the symmetry wasn't perfect because the model is not perfectly symmetrical. It wasn't oriented properly. So I just have to get my hands dirty and kind of clean that up a little bit. You can see my little line here doesn't look as good either. So maybe what I do is kind of redraw that a little bit at a cleaner 45. That feels pretty good now. And just paint in the rest. All right, you can be loose with this. Now make sure your mask is clean. So what I mean by that is if you paint with a feather brush, you might get gaps in your mask without realizing it, right? So let's say I've painted that in, and at a glance it looks okay, but if I look at the mask, you can see a lot of gaps in there. So do be cautious about that. So if I set my hardness to 1, I can just ensure I don't do that by accident. And if I kind of paint over, just remove. Now it looks good. This is a little feathered here, so I'll go ahead and clean that up. Let's just redraw it. If it's too big, just paint in X or paint in black, right? Just hit tap X to go to your black and just clean that up, right? If it's doing something wonky like that, just turn symmetry off and you can refine it a little bit easier, okay? Again, I'm not looking for perfection here. Close enough will be fine. So we've got our mask in there. I'll hit M to go back to my material view. And we have our pages or our fabric, right? It is applied. Look how quick this is coming along, right? We're spending a lot of time talking about it, but if we were going through the motions, we could do this really quick. So now I want to add some frequency to this, some high chaos here. So how do we do that? Well, think about the leather, right? How did we do that? If we go back to the leather, you can see it's just a mask and a layer blending down. So we're going to do the same thing here. I'm going to duplicate this layer, Control D, and I'm going to go ahead and change the color. Let's go with like a really light desaturated green. So I'm just lifting that value up. Or if I wanted to, again, I could just color pick, kind of get that light green right there. Good enough. All right. The question is, how do I blend this down? Same idea, right? We're just going to use a mask. Right click, create a black mask. Now I don't want to paint it in. I'm lazy. A generator wouldn't work too well here either. So what I'm going to show you is a different way to do this. We're going to use a fill layer to drive the mask. All right, so we're going to right click on the mask, add a fill. Now by default, it comes in as a solid color, either white, black, 50% gray. Still not very useful because it's just, again, a solid color. Where this really becomes powerful is when I start to connect textures into this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to search for grunge maps. So if I search for grunge and I filter by textures here, you're going to get all of the grunge maps that Painter has built in. Now what's great about this is I can use any one of these as a texture. If I drag and drop this into the grayscale, take a look at the result I get. Do you see why this is so powerful? Where the mask is white, we start to see the effect of the layer. Where it's black, we see the layer beneath. Where it's gray, we start to blend. Okay? So I want to find a good, high-quality grunge to get this look that we see right here. So that'll come through trial and error. Try a different grunge map. So again, the way I change it out, click on the grunge leaks, take another texture, drag and drop. Now I do have some additional controls like balance, contrast, but I can also boost the intensity by just playing with the color as well. So if the color is just simply too dark, make the color brighter. It'll still blend. So for me, this Grunge Dirt Muddy is key. Look at the quality or the contrast in the image is quite low, right? If I were to use something like, oh, I don't know, Grunge Dirt Splats here, it's just too harsh. The transition's too fast, too strong. It's not going to look that great. Or if I use something like this guy, again, also just simply too strong. This is too strong, right? There's not a lot of fall off. Now I can blend in additional textures. I can get it to work, but I'm just going to go with Grunge Dirt Muddy, kind of play with the balance a little bit and a little bit of contrast. And there we go. All right, sorry I missed some of your questions here. Let's see, what do we got? Turn off pressure was what? So if you right click, so with my paintbrush selected, so right now I don't have a paint layer, but if I just grab a paint layer and right click, whoops, that's not a paint layer either. Let me grab that guy. So this little pin icon right here, you can turn off pin pressure on and off, okay? Can you go over the sides of the brush again? Control, right click, left and right will do it. Yeah, so instead of me going over that, just hold Control and just look at the lower left hand of the viewport. Command, yeah, for Mac, sorry. Command on a Mac, Control. I'm going to do that a lot. So if I say Control, replace it with Command. Good catch, good catch. All right, so we've got our fabric on there. All right, let's collapse that. Let's collapse the leather. Let's add gold. All right, same idea. Let's search for gold. And we'll filter by material. There it is, drag and drop. And we got ourselves a really posh looking book. Real fancy, right? Same problem, height is blending. So how do we fix that? Let's go ahead and group it first. Go into my height channel and set the group to normal. And wouldn't you know it, it did not fix the problem. Why? So oftentimes we're gonna have to be doing a little bit of troubleshooting beyond just the initial setup. We did everything correct, right? But if you look closely, you can see that the height thumbnail is a checkerboard. There is no height. There is nothing to blend. And because of that, it just looks bumpy. So it isn't until we turn on the height channel that we can actually fix this. Notice how when I enabled it, it goes black. There's value there. It's just really dark perceptually. So the height channel was not turned on by default for this material. So this is what makes Painter really powerful as well. I can turn off various channels and use whatever attributes I want from that layer. So in this case, I'm just going to enable height. Maybe we'll knock the roughness down a little bit, get a nice sheen to it. And then let's go ahead and mask it out. So we'll call this gold group. Make this yellow. Mask the group. And let's paint in our line. So I should already have my brush set up. UV alignment, size, space, texture. Perfect. I'm going to go to my 2D view. And we're going to go ahead and draw this out. Now I can enable symmetry. That's fine. I'm just going to keep it off for now. Make a really small brush, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to create that little line right there. So I don't want a big thick line. That's not going to look good. All right. Nice and small. Somewhere around there. Now, if you're on a Mac screen, it might be a little tight. It's a little hard to see. If you hit Tab, you can go full screen with your interface. And now I can draw this a little bit easier. Okay. We're just putting those in. It's a work of art. It's beautiful. And we have our gold lines, just like that. We could even give them a little bit of height. So if I hit Tab, I can go right back, go back to my gold material, bump the height a little bit, really little. I don't want to crank it. Less is more. All right. So this is 0.042. That should be plenty for what I'm trying to do. All right. And there we go. Next up, pages. How do we do pages? Now, this is where it gets a little weird, right? Because if I search for pages, there's nothing here, right? Even if I turn off all the filters, there's no pages. If I search for paper, I get some alphas, but there's nothing here that's really that good. Now, how can we find additional materials? Now, there is something called Substance Share and Substance Source. Substance Share is a free community-driven website with a bunch of free assets. Models, materials, filters, grunge maps, anything and everything is on this site. So if I just search for materials, you might get lucky, right? So if I search for paper here, we might be able to find something. Now, unfortunately, I'm not really seeing anything all that great, right? If we look at this, you can see like paper scattered, not really what I'm looking for, but it's kind of cool, right? Because of its free nature, it's kind of a gamble, the quality you're going to get. Some of it's pretty good, some of it not so good, so use sparingly, right? Be smart about it. If I search for pages, you can actually find one that could work, right? Somebody actually designed something that looks and feels similar to pages. But in this case, like I said, we're going to keep this all built into Painter. So I'm going to show you how we can create this. Now, there's also something called Substance Source. This is not free. This is their paid version of Substance Share. That being said, the quality, way better. Way, way better. In fact, there's a lot more of them. In fact, there's models. That's kind of their big push right now, is to have like provided models that you can just download and use in your scenes. I haven't really looked at them yet, but I'm sure they're of great quality. They're kind of going the Quixel route with that high-res scan data. But if you look at the materials, there's over 7,000 materials, 125 free ones, including models. Go grab those, right, while they're free. Obviously, don't claim them as your own. That's bad. But there's a lot of good stuff in here. Ooh, free HDRs. Don't mind if I do. Yes, please. But there's also materials in here, right? And if you look at them, you can see exactly what they are, right? Add it to your library. Add it to your collection. So this is really powerful stuff. In fact, if you want to look at the 3D player here, you can actually see what controls they offer you. So different variants here and whatnot. So yeah, it's cool. Substance Share has the same functionality. It had a lot of controls depending on what the artist has created for you, okay? But again, in this case, we're going to build it ourselves, okay? So what I'm going to do is use something called Wood Rough. There it is in all its glory. And I'm going to go ahead and apply this at the top of my layer stack, and we're going to go ahead and group this as well. Now, it's got the same height blend issue, but if you think about it, I'm just going to only reveal it on the pages themselves. I don't have to worry about it. Let's call this pages group. Color it. I'm going to go with purple because why not? And we're going to mask it. Black mask. Easy solution. We're going to hit 4, grab our UV chunk, left click the shells that we want to paint white. And there we are. Now, it doesn't look like pages yet, right? We're just starting. So in order to get this to look like paper, we have to get a little bit more creative. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to tile the crap out of this vertically, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unlock the scale and take the UV transformation and just take the V and repeat it over and over. So as I start to slowly increase this, you're going to see the texture repeat vertically more and more and more. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to 16 and take a look at what we get. We get something that simulates paper quite well. Now it does have some visible seams, but again, from a distance, I think we're good. It looks good, right? Don't stress over it. This will work. Now I can still color pick it, right? It's got kind of a warmish hue to it, so let's just color pick that. Maybe a little bit bright, so I'll darken it. Good enough. Good enough. Oftentimes, good enough will work, right? Because again, now if this were like a Samsung phone commercial, is going to be an intimate hero shot, and we're this close, yeah, we're going to make some different considerations, right? But in this case, it will be okay. Let's add some grunge to this. So what I'm going to do, same thing, right? Think about how we kind of created this effect. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate the wood rough. Now notice that the height got a little bit more intense. Height is additive. So in this case, you know what? Maybe all I really need is color. So I'll turn metal, rough, and height off. Height was the big one. I'm going to take my color and darken it. So now I have this dark layer right on top. Let's blend this down. Black mask. Let's connect in a generator, and let's try the dirt generator. Dirt generator leverages the ambient occlusion, which means it's going to pull a lot of information in the crevices of my model, and thus give me this effect right here. Not too bad. Not too bad. Now take a look at what we've got. We've pretty much almost finished this asset, right? We got everything kind of there. All we need to do now is a little bit of detail on the spine of the book. Now these are a little bit more specific. These are a little bit more challenging, but it's really just repeating the same techniques we've learned up to this point. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to continue building up on the gold, right? We've got this little square box. We've got text, a little squiggly line, and it kind of repeats itself. Okay, so we're going to have to do this a couple times, right? So let's go back to our gold group. And what I'm going to do is we're going to append to the gold mask. Now, I want to add a paint layer, and I want to try and paint in a square. No, we're not going to do this, right? Good luck trying to get a perfect square, even if you hold shift. I mean, you could do it. Let's do something better. Instead of a paint layer, I'm going to use a fill layer. All right, so it's flooding the whole surface. Notice it's kind of replaced the gold lines, okay? So what I want to do is replace this texture, or at least the solid color, with a texture. So I'm going to search for square. And we're going to load in the shape border square into the actual fill. Drag and drop. Now let's take a look at this. It's working, it's connected, but it's too big. So if I go into my 2D view, I can actually move the fill layer around and kind of position this. I can start to scale it down and get it exactly where I need it. Now it is tiling. That is a problem. I don't want it to tile. So I'm going to go into my properties for my fill layer, turn UV repeat to none. Now I just have this square kind of hanging out. So now it's just a matter of getting the positioning right where I need it. Now those lines are a bit thick, right? But with most things in Painter, I do have some additional functionality. I can control the border width and get it exactly the way I want it. The benefit of the fill layer is that, again, I can move it, I can size it, and I'm not locked in. I can change it any time. If I had painted this, I'm locked in, right? So this is going to be extremely beneficial. Now I'm going to scale this down, kind of eyeball this as best I can. Now this is going to be a little bit more rectangular, so I'm going to go ahead and just bring this in like so. Play with my border width, make that relatively thin. Take a look at my 3D view. I can do it in both views too if I want to better position this, right? I feel like that's probably good, maybe a little bit higher. Let's see. Yeah, it's about right there. That feels pretty good. Maybe my initial spot felt good. Now again, be careful. I don't want it too wide, right? I don't want it kind of bleeding up here, so I'm going to tuck that in a little bit and then tuck it in on this side as well. Magical. Now, I need two of them, right? Guess what? We can duplicate layers within the mask. So if I hit Control D, move it down, hey, we're saving time. I'm not going to do that though. I'm going to let you guys do that. Just know you can actually duplicate those and move them around. Let's get the text. Now, text, unfortunately, is feature limited. It's not that great. So if I search for font, let me go ahead and disable all search parameters here. Oh, not front, sorry, font. There isn't a whole lot we can use here. So basically everything from here to here are the customizable fonts and text we can use. The ones beyond this are just alphas and stamps, right? So like the area, the clear, the close, those are just a one and done stamp. You can't really change them. These we can. We can replace the text with whatever we want. So I'm going to do another fill layer. And I'm going to take in Font Courier Prime. This looks somewhat similar to what we need here, right? You could use whatever. I wouldn't recommend anything like Comic Sans. Please don't do that. Wingdings, terrible choice. I'm going to go with Font Courier Prime. Just drag and drop. And we get Substance, right? And I'm going to just do the exact same thing. I'm going to start to scale this down. I'm going to turn Repeat to none. And we're just going to get this into position. Now we have a potential problem. Notice that the area outside of the substance is black. And because it's set to normal in my blend mode, it covers up the other lines. Thankfully, we can change that, right? The lines are still there. We're just kind of covering them up currently. So I'm going to change the blend mode. So remember how we changed the blend mode from the height from linear dodge to normal? I'm going to change this one from normal to linear dodge and add the contents from below. So I'm going to click on this little normal, linear dodge, and now all the lines are there, right? So anything that was white prior, 1 plus whatever, is the same, right? Anything that's black just stays black. Now I can scale this down and get this right where I need it without having to worry about my lines disappearing. Let's change the text. Now, I'm giving you guys creative freedom here. The more you make me laugh, the better your grade. So feel free to get creative with the text. So I'm going to do Library of the World's Best Literature. So we have some problems. It didn't quite fit, right? It got cut off. So I have a couple options. I can adjust the Y position here. It's kind of getting pushed off the alpha. And I have a size controller. So I'm just going to kind of bring that size down and just kind of play with the positioning a little bit. That feels pretty good. Now, of the is a little bit smaller. So what I could do is just simply delete of the and create a new layer for that. All right, so that feels pretty good. I wonder if I do bold. Yeah, I like the bold. That feels good. I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to call this of the, if I can type, of the text. Thankfully, it's already set to linear dodge. So if I just replace of the, or just kind of wipe the whole thing, I can now position this however I want. So if I want to change the size now, done. So again, it's not the best solution, but it is a solution nonetheless. It'll work, right? Unfortunately, the font tool is very limited. Basically, what you see here is what you get. If you wanted, though, you could technically create alphas back in Photoshop and bring those in. You would have full customization of the Photoshop suite. So I was really hoping they would change this in the most recent update. Unfortunately, not the case. All right. Squiggly line. How the heck are we going to do that? Let's add another fill layer. Actually, you know what? We're going to change it up. We're going to stick with the paint layer, so I want to show you how to do a custom brush. So I'm going to go ahead and add a paint layer. We're going to call this curvy or curly. We'll do curvy line. Just make sure you're naming these. We'll call this square shape text of the text, curvy line. You can name these to whatever you want as long as you understand them. So we're just going to keep adding and adding and adding until we get all the results, right? Now you could try as hard as you want, make that as curly and curvy as you want. It's going to be a struggle. There is a lazy mouse functionality. You can turn that on up here, and it's only going to draw until it reaches the edge of the circle, which could be useful. That's nice in ZBrush, but in this case, we're not going to do that. We're going to do something a bit better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to search for something called curve. And I'm going to use line waves. Now again, I would never expect you guys to figure this out on the fly, right? This is just from practice and using the software. You kind of learn how these things and interactions work. I'm going to load this into my brush. So I'm going to double click on it. So it is now in my brush. And effectively what I've created is now, if you've ever watched The Fifth Element, we got all the symbols here: fire, water, wind. Yeah, never mind. Great movie, by the way, if you've never seen it. So I do want to make some modifications here. Obviously, I don't want 3 lines. So we're going to go down, take a look at my brush settings, drop the number to 1, take the bend to 1 and drop the width. So I get 1 line, right? And then if I knew nothing else, I could kind of do this, right? Just stamp it in there many, many times. But again, I'm lazy. I don't want to do that. I will make the width a little bit bigger though. A little bit more. That feels good. All right, so we get something like that. But really what I want to do is I want to just click and drag and get the result I'm looking for. So let's see what settings we have. So I'm going to go ahead and set my angle back to 0, and I'm going to turn on follow path. So now what that's going to do is going to follow the direction of my cursor. All right, so far so good. That's cool. And then all I'm going to do is take my spacing and kind of bump that up. And so now when I draw, I get kind of a stitch effect. See where we're going with this? So I'm going to take that spacing. I'm going to set it to 101. Click, hold shift, click again. Now I'm getting close. Let's try reducing it to 100. Click, hold shift. Try 99. Bingo, right? That looks good. Now I want to kind of save this brush. I don't want to lose my work. Actually, I might have to make this a little bit smaller. That feels better, right? I'm kind of looking at the reference here. It's not a perfect match, but it'll work. Now, let's save the brush. If you right click on the little thumbnail here, you can create a brush preset. So go ahead and do that. And then we can name it. So if you right click on this, we can name it. We can call this curly line preset. And now whenever you search for curly, there it is. You can just double click and load that into your brush, and then you can just draw that out, right? Done deal. And so now it's just a matter of kind of getting these in. So I'm going to click once, hold shift, click again, click once, hold shift, click again, bingo. Now again, I want to be cautious, so maybe if I paint a little too much, just grab your eraser and just kind of remove some of the edges. And there we are. Gold squiggly lines, looking glorious. I'm going to take that height down just a notch, make that super subtle. Questions on that? How we doing? Yes, like the movie, or love the movie. Good. You're passing this class. No, I'm kidding. Everyone has to go watch The Fifth Element if you've not seen it. All right, so we've got our gold. All right. And that's looking pretty good. Again, we would have to repeat that process. Now, if you want to feel a little bit savvy, could you do the curly line on a fill layer so you can duplicate it? You sure could. You sure could. And you have to get a little bit more savvy and creative with how you do it. So challenge yourself. Go for it. But everything else is a fill layer. We can technically duplicate that, shift it down, and we're pretty much good. Okay? So now I'm going to create some additional detail here, and we'll kind of wrap it up. So I want this dark backdrop for my text, right? And I want these little dark lines that recess inward as well as this emblem here, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my leather. And I'm going to duplicate the leather. Notice that the height got extremely strong, right? So again, I'll do that again. If I duplicate the leather, it became really strong. It is additive. So we're going to change that. I'm going to go back to my height channel, set the height to normal. So it's no longer adding, it's just sitting on top. But I'm going to make some additional changes here. I want this to be smoother. So I'm going to go down into my technical parameters, take the height range and start to lower it to like 0.03. Notice how it's a bit flatter. See what that's kind of doing over here. Let's take the color and make that darker as well. Hey, we're getting somewhere. Now the problem is it's applied to everything. So what do? First off, let's name it dark leather and mask it. And let's swap out our brush. We'll get a basic hard brush. Double click that in and paint that in. So now we're just revealing where that effect for that layer happens. Just like that. Really that simple, I promise. Beautiful. Now the emblems, these recess down. Now, in order to do that, I need to adjust the height position. So there's a relationship here. Range is the intensity, right? So if we consider, let's do this. I got a sheet of paper, okay? So if we consider range, the intensity, the amount of height is based off that range. So as I increase it, I'm increasing that intensity. If I adjust the position, I'm offsetting it. I'm moving it up and down. Now, every layer has its own relationship with one another. So if I move the leather down by adjusting the position down, the gold here is still up here, okay? So as I move this down, see how the gold looks really weird? We don't want that. So we don't want to move this one. We're going to leave this alone. Instead, we're going to duplicate the dark leather again. We're going to rename this to emblem, remove the mask with a new one, and then paint it in ourselves. So now if I want these little lines here, let's go ahead and do that. In fact, it's probably easier to do a line using a fill layer because I could just duplicate it, right? But I'm just going to go ahead and draw this. Now, if I take that and I go into my material properties, go back to my technical parameters and adjust the position of the emblem layer, I can have that recess in. And so now I'm getting this nice little effect where it eats into the material. Look at that. All right, and then I would just repeat that multiple times. And if I want to do the emblem itself, let's add another paint layer. So we'll call these lines, we'll call this emblem. Or personally, honestly, let's just do a fill layer, right? That's going to make it easier to adjust so we don't have to like stamp it in there. Let's take a look at some of the alphas. So if I search for alpha, which I believe is this one, nope, I was wrong. Alpha's right there. We have a bunch of like preset icons, right? But again, I'm giving you guys full creative control if you want to use a custom icon. So what is popular these days? What video games are you guys playing right now? Let's hear it. Because we could just take any one of these, plug it in. Yeah, okay, super exciting. But let's get something custom. Warframe. Okay, Warframe it is. Let's see if we can find the logo for Warframe. I like it. This will work really well. So if we think about this like a mask, we're going to need something that's black and white, right? So there are some filters here you can do up in your tools. If you change the color to black and white, this can help kind of narrow your search very, very quickly. This one's inverted. That's fine. This one has the full logo. I'm going to go with this one. It doesn't really matter. That's got stock images on it. Really? Okay, we're going with this one. 3,000 pixels by 2,000. So we're going to have to do some adjustments here. So I'm going to take this in. So we're going to go ahead, just open image and new tab. So we get something like this, right? I'm going to have to do some cleanup here. This has got a bit of grayscale in it, and this is black. We need it to be the opposite. So I'm going to just copy this image, and let's go into Photoshop real quick. Now, Photoshop is going to be required for this class. It's never going away. You'll always need Photoshop, whether it's good or bad. It's a necessary evil. Perfect. Wait for the program to respond and hope it loads. Ah, really? Oh, this is good. Okay, abort. We'll have to figure this out later. So we're going to use a pre-built. So what you can do, oh great, Google, no Google, stop. Google Assistant, go away. Perfect, that's how we're going to end the lecture. Google Assistant going crazy. Okay, so you can correct the images in Photoshop. And what I would recommend to bring it in, you import a resource, right? You add the resource, you look what you're looking for, whatever image you have. So if I just go into my pictures here, let's say I want to bring in this image of eggs. Actually, yeah, we'll bring in an image of eggs. What you do is you define it as an alpha, and then you would bring it into your project, right? And once you import it, you'll see it. And then you could apply it into your grayscale, all right? So you can bring in custom textures. So now you know how to do that. Unfortunately, Photoshop licensing, I don't even remember my login, so it's sorry. All right, so let's just use a custom emblem. It'll work just fine for our needs. Let's go with I always spend way too much time like, yeah, that one I like. All right, so that's in there. Go into my 2D view, so it's a little bit easier. We'll turn repeat to none. Scale it down. Get that exactly where you need it. You can even rotate it, whatever you want to do. Hey, look at this. It's got some extra controls in here. Fancy, fancy. Now I'm just having fun. All right. I think you get the idea. So again, watch the centering there. So maybe we kind of line that a little bit better. And there you go. That's the book. Okay. So it's a lot. It definitely is an information overload for sure. Okay. Take it one layer at a time, one group at a time. Some good ways to troubleshoot is going to be just simply turning off layers and trying to diagnose where the problems might be stemming from, right? If you can isolate the problem, it's easier to kind of correct, right? Just toggle the visibility where you can and just focus in that area. Holding Option and clicking on the mask is very good to seeing any masking issues. Hitting M to go back to your material view will do that, okay? So what I'm looking for your submission is for you to recreate the whole book. This includes all the little line work, the repeating emblems, both text boxes. Again, use whatever emblem, whatever text you want. Get creative, but I'm still looking for similar colors and leather patterns to the reference. Okay?